Okay, so I've let this one sit for a couple of days since I actually finished reading part 3, and that's for very different reasons than when I finished reading Alloy of Law. So when I finished reading Alloy of Law, I took a break before I actually recorded anything because I wanted to get my thoughts in order and make sure that my opinion really was as negative as I felt it was, because I didn't want to be unfair. But for this, for part 3 of Words of Radiance, I took like 3 days before recording this because I had to figure out what I could afford to not talk about, because I quickly realized, looking at my notes, that if I talked about everything I had some thoughts about here, this video would be an hour long. And I'm trying to keep these videos like around half an hour, like, or less. So here's my best attempt to talk about this part of the book as succinctly as possible, because there's so much here. Like, the lift chapter at the end on its own, I could make an entire video just about that. I have a ton of thoughts about Lift, but I'll talk about Lift at the end because she's at the end of this part. So I'm going to separate this into 4 main parts. I'm going to talk about Shallan, then I'm going to talk about Kaladin, then I'm going to talk about some of the Cosmere meta-narrative stuff going on, and then I'm going to talk about the three intermission chapters at the end, which are each their own can of worms. So, Shallan. Shallan has now met the other main characters. I was actually not expecting that. I was expecting that this whole book would be Shallan journeying towards the Shattered Plains and maybe getting lost or sidetracked and ending up somewhere else entirely. I did not expect all of our main point of view characters to end up concentrated in one place this early on. And yet, here we are. So, Shallan meeting with Kaladin is one of the most over-the-top absurd scenes ever. The whole time I was just thinking, Kaladin, how did you let this normal everyday interaction escalate this much? To the point where they're screaming obscenities at each other in a crowded hallway. It's so ridiculous and so absurd. And yet, and at the time when I first read that, I was like, this was like weirdly out of character for Kaladin. Not for Shallan, definitely not for Shallan. Shallan is just an asshole by nature, and she's very well aware of it. And it's why I love her. But then as this part went on, we actually got to see more and more of Kaladin through the point of view of other characters, both Shallan and Adolin. And that kind of made me realize that Kaladin is also a giant asshole. He's just less self-aware about it. So we get fewer reminders of that when we're in his point of view, because he's very self-righteous, usually justifiably, but whenever he's like mean to someone or mouths off to someone from his point of view, it's justified. And so when we're seeing it from his point of view, it doesn't come off as him being a giant dick. But as soon as you see him like from outside, especially from a light-eyed perspective, he's unbearable to be around. Which was a really funny realization for me, because that's not something that I'd realized about Kaladin at all. Anyway, we're talking about Shallan, not Kaladin right now. So Shallan arrives, meets all the other characters, gives the bad news about Yasna, masterfully figures out that Sebarial is the person she should be aligning herself with, and manages to get into his good graces And by the way, I love Sebarial and his girlfriend. I love those two characters. They're very, very, very fun and interesting. And I also love that Sebarial is the only person in the entire goddamn Alethi nation who isn't enough of a violence-obsessed moron to realize that, like, hey, maybe we should grow some food here in this place where we live now. Everyone else is just like, yay, murder! And he's like, hey, let's not starve to death. I have the feeling that in the coming months, as things go south, which I'm sure they will, I have a feeling that Sebarial's preparations on the Shattered Plains are going to be vital to a lot of people's survival. Anyway, so I love Sebarial and his girlfriend, and I love how Shallan sort of weasels her way into their confidence. And then Shallan starts really escalating her personal training in her powers. This is the part of the book where both she and Kaladin, like, level up massively. Like, this whole part of the book is basically, like, training montages for Shallan and Kaladin, kind of. So Shallan can now fully impersonate people, except she can't. Well, she can at the end. She does ultimately end up impersonating actual people, but the first thing she does is create a fake person who doesn't exist. She doesn't impersonate an actual person, she just invents a new persona for herself, which is Veil. It's really interesting. One thing that happens here is something I'm going to talk about later when I'm talking about the Cosmere stuff. So I'll get back to the creation of Veil in a moment. But Veil herself, the persona of Veil, allows Shallan to work her way into the... I keep forgetting their names. The something Bloods? The group... The group her father was associated with, the group who killed Yasna. Ghost Bloods. Ghost Bloods. And we meet the Ghost Bloods, and I am like 95% convinced that the leader of the Ghost Bloods, Mraiz, is one of whatever the hell Hoyd is. Like a world hopping person. Like someone who is very much aware of other worlds and has been to them and is probably immortal. It's interesting that this far into the story, I still have no idea what Hoyd actually is, I guess, or what his kind of people are, but I'm sure Mraiz is one of them. That's kind of obvious from how he speaks. He uses language that makes it pretty obvious that he's treating Roshar as just one of many worlds, and he's familiar with other worlds. And actually, in retrospect, it makes me think that the thing I talked about last time, the recovered paper from Shallan's notes, where someone used the phrase Roshar's Oceans on it, I said at the time that I think that was someone working for Hoyd. I now think that was someone working for Mraiz. I think that particular paper was a note written for Mraiz. Anyway, so Yasna, what the hell? No, Shallan is really, really successful at integrating herself into the Ghost Bloods, even though some of them try to kill her at the end of this part, but I think that was like almost like a hazing, basically. I don't think that Mraiz wants her dead. I think Mraiz was just kind of like testing to see if she could survive having some of the Ghost Bloods try to kill her. So she's now way in over her head, and she has some momentous discoveries when she breaks into Amaram's place. So first of all, we now know Amaram is not just a bad guy because of what he did to Kaladin, but like a bad guy on like an existential, eschatological level. Like, the man wants to destroy the world or something. Seems to be the implication. Like, he is involved with some dark stuff. It's still not clear exactly what, but he's clearly not working for Mraiz. Mraiz's faction is clearly opposed to him. And I get the feeling that the King of Kharbranth, whose name I can't remember, Teravengian, something like that, I get the feeling that he is also... I think he's a third faction. I think he's not associated with Mraiz or with Amaram. So I think there's at least... I think there's 4 major, like, factions working behind the scenes on the supernatural level. So you've got the King of Kharbranth, you've got Mraiz, you've got Mraiz and the Ghostbloods. And actually I have a name for the leader of the Ghostbloods, because Mraiz isn't the leader. Mraiz said at one point that he works for someone. Let me just find this in my notes. Where is this? Yeah, Mraiz mentioned that they work for someone named Thaidakar, and that their main rival opponent is someone named Restares. So apparently those are 2 major factions, Restares and Thaidakar. I'm guessing Restares is probably who Amaram is working for. So that's 3 factions. So there's Thaidakar and the Ghostbloods, Restares and maybe Amaram, and the King of Kharbranth. And then there's Hoid, who I think is a faction all on his own. I think Hoid isn't working with any of these people. I think Hoid is doing his own thing, without actually a faction on his side. I've gotten into the Cosmere stuff again. This is going to be a chaotic video, I'm sorry. So, back to Shallan. The other important thing that Shallan discovers, which is much less important for the overall plot, but much more interesting to me as a reader and also to Shallan, is the fact that Kaladin killed her brother. Of course, she doesn't know it was Kaladin. She thinks it was Amaram. But we know that her identifying that sword as Helaren's sword means that Kaladin killed her brother. Yikes. Whenever that comes to light, that's gonna be rough. That's gonna be really rough for their relationship, which is already rough. So Kaladin and Shallan can only go downhill from here, that whole relationship cannot end well. So Shallan is now basically has a personal reason to be involved in this, because I'm sure she also wants personal revenge against Amaram now, in addition to working for the Ghostbloods. Obviously, she's not actually working for the Ghostbloods. She's tricking them into thinking she's working for them. That's what I meant. But that's not even all that Shallan does, because this whole section has so much stuff happening to Shallan. Aside from all this, there's like 2 whole other threads going on in Shallan's life. One is the flashbacks, in which we learn, among other things, that Shallan has met Hoid, and that Hoid has given her useful life advice when she was younger. Although obviously she didn't know it was Hoid, but as soon as he showed up, I knew it was Hoid. I don't think that was meant to be like a surprise when it turned out to be Hoid at the end, when she actually met him. I think we were supposed to figure out that was Hoid in her flashback. And that's the other reason I think Mraiz is whatever Hoid is, because Mraiz reminds her of Hoid. So she's met Hoid. I'm becoming increasingly certain, like I suspected it for a while, but I'm now becoming pretty much certain that we're going to find out that Shallan killed her mother somehow, and not just her father. Because if it turns out that her father really did kill her mother, then there would be no point having all this build up towards that particular memory, because it's clear that the book is actively hiding the memory of her mother's death from us, the readers, and also from Shallan. Shallan's mind refuses to remember that. And I feel like that's more likely to be because she's the one who did it than anything else. And there's actually a really interesting thing there, which is that Pattern does remember, because Pattern has been with Shallan for a while. And Pattern keeps trying to talk about the past. And he actually just straight up says things about what happened that Shallan refuses to hear. And therefore, we as the readers don't get to hear what Pattern says. Like, his dialogue just cuts off. And he keeps talking, but Shallan shuts her ears to it. So, Pattern knows what happened. And that's a really, it's really interesting having a character who knows the backstory and openly talks about the backstory on page, but because of the main character's psychology, we as the readers don't get to hear what they say. It's similar, kind of, to how the first book handled Dalinar's wife's name. Like, whenever she'd come up, it would just be blocked out in the text. Like, people would say her name, and neither Dalinar nor the readers would get to hear it. Actually, that's interesting. I feel like Dalinar's wife has not really been mentioned in this book much. That whole thread's kind of been forgotten. I'm sure we'll get more of that in the Dalinar book, which I think is the next one. Not Oathbreaker, the other thing. Oathbringer, maybe. Is it Oathbringer? I think so. Anyway, so yeah, that's really interesting how that's written, and I really appreciate it. And the other thing that's happening with Shallan right now is her whirlwind romance with Adolin. Shallan and Adolin being, like, completely smitten with each other on first sight is a bit cheesy, a bit convenient, in my opinion. Like, when it first happened, I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, okay, what? That seems a bit unlikely, that the people who happen to be engaged but have never met also immediately fall in love with each other before even knowing that. That's like a bit fairy tale. But they very quickly actually start building a believable relationship. Like, their interactions are funny and charming and cool and cute, and they have that nice date on the night of the storm in the storm terrace where you're risking your life to watch the storm, I guess. And then things get weird, and by things I mean Brandon's choice of words. So, the chapter where Shallan and Adolin have a date, and they talk about poop, and how one does that in a shard plate, feels anachronistic. In particular, some word choices, like the word poop for a start feels weird. I do not feel like these characters would use the word poop. That's a weird word to use for these characters, to me. I could be wrong. Like, maybe that word is older and more generally used in history than I thought, but it feels like a very, like, contemporary and also childish word, and not one that, like, adult nobles in, like, a vaguely medieval-ish setting would use. And the other two words that get used in this chapter, which I found kind of odd, were sexist and misogynist. So, I don't mean that the words were sexist in nature. I mean that was the actual word. The word sexist and the word misogynist are used. And that also feels weirdly anachronistic. I don't think it's weird that this setting has the concept of sexism or misogyny. I mean, I don't think it's weird that these characters have these concepts or have these, like, somewhat feminist ideas, because clearly this is a setting where women both don't have equal positions to men in society, but have enough power and influence in society, and also are academic in nature a lot of the time, that they would have developed these concepts. But it just kind of felt weird to have them use those specific terms, especially sexist. Like, misogynist feels like the sort of term that, like, a scholar would invent to describe the concept of hating women. But sexist just kind of feels like a very 20th century term to me. I could be wrong about that. Like, maybe that word is older than I think. I haven't actually looked that up. I just wanted to get that off my chest, that, like, the word choices in this chapter felt kind of off to me in a way that nothing else in the book has so far. Anyway, aside from that, their date was very cute. And I kind of ship them now. Even though I don't really love how their relationship began with the whole love at first sight thing, which felt a bit silly. That said, I do have to talk about one thing, and that is age difference. The age difference between Shallan and Adolin is quite severe. She's 17, I think, at this point, and he's like 24, 25. That's pretty questionable by modern standards. Obviously, within the setting, it's not, but, like, it does make me somewhat uncomfortable and hesitant to, like, full-on ship them. But it makes me more uncomfortable that it's part of a pattern I've noticed. So, almost all major romantic relationships in the Cosmere so far have featured notable age differences, and it's always an older man and a younger woman. So, Vin and Elend, not a very severe age difference, but certainly one nonetheless. Breeze and his girlfriend, which was so severe that Brandon had to retcon it really clumsily in the next book. In Warbreaker, both the actual pairing and the one that's kind of implied for the two sisters, both of them are with significantly older men. In fact, supernaturally old men. And now this. And in Alloy of Law, I'm pretty sure both Steris and Marasi are significantly younger than Wax. They're all adults. Like, it's not as bad as this, because none of them are like 17 like Shallan. Like, they're all in their 20s, I think. But it's a bit iffy, and I don't like that it's such a pattern. I do really wish that there would be more equal age relationships, like Dalinar and Navani, or Serene and Raoden in Elantris, or at least some relationships where the guy is younger than the girl. Just wanted to get that. I'm not gonna bring this up too much unless even more relationships like this come up. I just wanted to get it off my chest that it does make me a little bit uncomfortable how consistent that age dynamic is in Brandon's romance writing. Okay, so, finally moving on from Shallan after 24 minutes, Jesus Christ. So, finally moving on from Shallan, Kaladin. I have less to talk about Kaladin, but more intense things to talk about Kaladin, because I'm mad at Kaladin. And every other character as well, after the end of this part. So, I'm just gonna, like, really the only thing I need to acknowledge about the earlier parts of this chapter, of this part before the climax, when it comes to Kaladin, is, the whole Moash thing, the reveal that Moash is trying to kill the king, which I'll talk about more later. I just want to acknowledge that it happened here. And that Kaladin is inclined to not side with the assassins, which is reasonable. I don't think that it's unreasonable for Kaladin to not want to take part in the assassination of the king. since he has no personal reason to want to assassinate the king, unlike Moash. So that happens, and then the other thing that happens is that Kaladin becomes much, much more adept at using his powers. He has like a proper shonen anime training montage in the canyons. Like, this is like the sort of like Dragon Ball Z filler episode where Goku trains out in the wilds or something by punching rocks. Kaladin gets one of those, and he can basically fly now, which is a pretty big upgrade. I'm looking forward to seeing how he uses that, especially considering where we leave him off at the end of this, which is not a great position. So, let's talk about that ending. First of all, Dalinar naming Amaram the first of the Radiants, I desperately want to know what was going through his head when he did that. I want to know, I need a Dalinar POV. It's been so long since we've gotten one. I need to know, first of all, what pushed him over the edge to decide to reform the Knights Radiant, and secondly, why he picked specifically Amaram for it instead of, like, Adolin. I guess to not appear like he's favoring his son. That makes sense, I suppose. But still, it's an interesting choice to pick Amaram for that. Even accounting for the fact that he doesn't believe Kaladin's story. Which is understandable. It's by the way, I just want to say, I don't necessarily think it's super unreasonable for Dalinar to not believe Kaladin. Like, I would be, if I were in this setting, I would probably believe him simply because I would assume that the Light Eyes are lying because they're Light Eyes, because I agree with Kaladin that they all suck. But Dalinar being who he is and being raised in the culture that he is, it makes sense that he would be super unlikely to take the word of someone like Kaladin, even someone he trusts implicitly with his life, like he trusts Kaladin, about something like this. Especially when there are like 17 witnesses saying otherwise. So, I don't necessarily condemn Dalinar for not just blindly believing Kaladin. However, I do condemn this entire culture and this entire society for the fact that apparently merely accusing a Light Eyes of a crime is punishable by death. So at this point, Kaladin, in my opinion, if he's got any sense, what Kaladin should do at this point is nothing. He should let Moash and his conspiracy kill Elhokar. First of all, definitely. There is no more reason to protect Elhokar. He has lost all rights to live, in my opinion, as far as Kaladin should be concerned. And also, frankly, I think Kaladin should just, when he gets out of prison, I feel like he should just take Bridge 4 and leave all of Alethkar to burn. Like, this society, this culture, this nation does not deserve having Kaladin fight for it in any way. I'm not saying it's going to be good for everyone to die, because obviously tons and tons of innocent people are going to die when whatever the Parshendi are doing happens. But from Kaladin's perspective, I think it would be totally justified for him to just say, no, screw it. Let it all burn. I'm leaving. He's not going to, because his whole thing is protecting people, and that's admirable. I'm just saying, it would be kind of satisfying if all these assholes died because Kaladin refused to help them because of what they did to him. It would be satisfying. It's not going to happen, and it's probably for the best that it doesn't happen, because, again, It's good to protect people. I'm just saying, it would be cathartic for me personally to watch that happen at this point. So yeah, Kaladin got really, really screwed. But before he got screwed, he had a truly epic showdown. I love that those final couple of chapters where they're all fighting on the field. I was like 99% sure that there was no way that Adolin was getting out of that with all of his limbs functioning. I thought for sure that he was gonna get crippled. But no, Kaladin saved his life. And that brings me to the final thing I want to talk about in regards to that particular scene, which is Renarin. So Renarin jumps into the arena, and he acts really weird. Like, part of his behavior can be explained by patterns intervention, but not all of it. A lot of what happens here with Renarin is really, really weird, and I reread that chapter like 3 times, specifically the parts mentioning Renarin, to try and figure out what actually happened. And I can't wait to get a Renarin POV to actually flesh that out. Here's my theory. I have a weird theory that's kind of wild. So what I think happened is that Renarin did get hit with a shard blade. Because we don't see how his fight with the Shardbearer ends. We just see the Shardbearer turn around and go to join the fight against Kaladin and Adolin, and then Kaladin looks and Renarin is like lying on the ground, defeated. I think that the Shardbearer got Renarin's leg or arm or whatever. And I think that Renarin is a Surgebinder, and he healed himself. And that's why he's fine now. This is a completely off-the-wall theory, and I'm 99% certain that I'm wrong. But that is kind of the vibe I got from that entire interaction, because when I saw him on the ground, it felt so clear to me that he had been hit with a shard blade somewhere. And I kept expecting the reveal of Kaladin to, like, see one of his limbs being all gray and dead. And then no, he's just fine. So, I could be wrong. Maybe he just had one of his fits. But I don't think that explains all of his behavior. It doesn't explain why he just kind of sat there and was waiting to die. Whereas I think if he thought that he was essentially crippled for life, that might go some way to explain why he was like, okay, just kill me, when the Shardbearer came at him. I could be completely off here, but that's my current working theory on what's going on there. And I've been talking for 33 minutes, so I think I'm going to cut this here, and I'm going to make a second video going over some of the Cosmere stuff in this part, and going over the 3 intermission chapters. And I'm not going to make you wait an additional week for that video, probably. Instead, I'm going to upload this video on Wednesday, according to my usual schedule, and then I'm going to upload that other video on Sunday. So you have like an extra video in between. And then the next Wednesday you'll get the next video in chronological order. So that's my current plan. Hopefully it works out. So I'm going to cut this here, and then I'm going to take a break and maybe record the second video either in like an hour or tomorrow or something. Yeah. See you next time, when I will talk a lot about Lift, and also a lot about Hoid and some Cosmere stuff that's going on here. See you then.